Is the first season of Star Trek The Next Generation a complete waste of time? That question is what I intend to answer in this video. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. And today we'll be talking about the first season of Star Trek The Next Generation. So to the people who know me, it's no secret that I absolutely love Star Trek. It's something that I grew up with ever since I was about 6 or 7 years old. I started watching it when I was in elementary school. My parents were Star Trek fans, so it made sense that they wanted me to be a Star Trek fan too. Now, when I first started watching Star Trek, I only saw the movies, so from the motion picture to Star Trek Nemesis, the 2009 movie hadn't come out yet. It was hard for me to get a hold of the TV shows. I never knew when it was going to happen on TV. You know, you had school, and plus when you're a kid, you don't have any control on purchases or anything like that, so I couldn't walk into a half-price books or any other store to pick up any of the TV shows on DVDs, so I had to wait until I was older to start watching those. My go-to was the original series. That's the show I really appreciated. I thought that TOS was a lot better than TNG. I tried to watch TNG when I was a kid, but I thought it was boring and I couldn't really understand what was happening. I feel like that's Star Trek in general for kids, is that all the ideas and concepts that are being explored are just beyond a little kid's understanding. As I got older, I started to appreciate Next Generation more and more. I watched this show a little bit more, and I really got invested into that, and it led me to watch the whole show back when it was on Netflix, and I really think it's on the same level as the original series. Back when I restarted my channel, I knew I would get around to talking about TNG sooner or later. I know it's something that's covered on YouTube a lot, but I really wanted to add my voice to the mix and be able to provide my own opinions on the show in general. And what better way to start off than with the first season of the show. Now, season 1 has a really bad reputation with the fandom. Actually, the first 2 seasons, a lot of people will disregard them entirely and skip right ahead to season 3, which I think is a bit of a mistake, because there's so much that it happens in the first 2 seasons that fans really need to understand and get behind. That's the intention here, I'm going to look through season 1 and see whether or not it should be skipped by fans who are curious about watching the show. So let's hop into the production of the first season. The first season of TNG was notoriously troubled in terms of the production. This series was put into production after the success of Star Trek IV in 1986. TNG was actually not the first time that Paramount intended to put Star Trek back on the small screen. In the mid-70s, they wanted to put the original series cast back on TV with Star Trek Phase 2. That production and development of the show eventually led to the development of Star Trek The Motion Picture, which was an enormous success, and it led to further sequels with the original series cast. So Paramount wanted to try it again a decade later. Now, originally Gene Roddenberry wasn't considered to be the showrunner of the series, but eventually he was put into that position. He would go on to produce and showrun the series as a whole for the first few seasons. While developing the show, Gene Roddenberry's vision for the show is cited as one of the primary sources of conflict for the behind-the-scenes trouble. Roddenberry's series Bible laid out a setting that greatly changed character, motivation, and dynamics for the Star Trek universe. The original vision for TNG was that humanity had evolved so much in the 24th century. It evolved to the point where society as a whole had overcame the whole slew of issues that we face today. Some of those include greed, capitalistic greed that is, poverty, personal goals or individualistic ideals. That was all wiped off the map with Roddenberry's Bible for the show. This meant that character conflict within the crew of the Enterprise was thrown out the window entirely. This was done in order to ensure peaceful unison with the cast of characters. Ultimately, TNG was intended as a vehicle to explore a time where humanity had evolved into a perfect utopia. This is covered more thoroughly in William Shatner's documentary Chaos on the Bridge. Great documentary. I recommend that you check it out. The type of drama that Roddenberry and his Bible made available would be unorthodox to the mainstream. Because of the mandate, many writers would struggle with these bullet list of requirements for writing on Star Trek The Next Generation. So a number of writers would go on to quit or were fired throughout this first season. Reportedly, there was over 30 writers who went out the door. Another issue that plagued the production of the show was Gene Roddenberry's health. His management style was also put into question, and the personal baggage that he dragged into the show helped hinder the overall smoothness of the entire production. A number of trusted colleagues that had known Gene for a while had a falling out with him during the production of the first season. The environment was hostile, to say the least. There was arguments happening all over the place. Maurice Hurley's promotion to lead writer on the show was also a point of contention among the writers and the staff. It was because he had a lack of sci-fi knowledge. He hadn't really written science fiction stories beforehand. He had been a writer on a number of cop shows, and suddenly he was promoted to that position, so there were a lot of writers who were scratching their heads at that decision. Also, there was a bit of trouble with the cast, especially with Patrick Stewart. He wanted to maintain a sense of professionalism on set, and he didn't like the idea of his coworkers goofing around in between shots. He wanted the environment to be very professional, so there was a little tension there, but that eventually got ironed out. Okay, moving on to the cast and characters. Patrick Stewart plays Captain Picard. Obviously, I believe him to be the best character in the series. He was inspired by Horatio Hornblower in that series. It is the epitome of the academic explorer. And Patrick Stewart is obviously a really great actor, and he brings so much gravitas to the role, and it's really entertaining to watch him chew the scenery and perform a number of monologues. Then we have Jonathan Frakes as Commander Riker. I don't think he really came into his own in the role until about season 2. He comes off as a bit stiff in the first season, a bit of a casualty to the overall direction of the show, but there is potential there in his performance, and he would become more likable as the show went on. Then you had Gates McFadden's Dr. Crusher. I really like Dr. Crusher's character, and there's a bit of backstory to that character that we get to see a little bit of in the first season here. Then we have Brent Spiner as Lieutenant Commander Data. I don't think Spiner really perfected his take on Data until the series was a couple seasons into production. He comes off as a little too human in some episodes. It really took him a little while to find his stride with the character. LeVar Burton is Geordi, memorable character there. And then you have Marina Sirtis as Counselor Troy. Michael Dorn as Lieutenant Worf. Again, his character was a little underbaked in the first season, and his character would become much more interesting in the seasons to come. Denise Crosby as Tasha Yar. Crosby got bored with the show, so she decided to leave halfway through the first season. Then you have Willow Wheaton as the infamous Wesley Crusher. A lot of fans have a problem with Wesley, but sometimes he can come off as a little annoying, but I don't have a massive problem with him. It is what it is. Okay, moving on to the meat and potatoes of this video, my overall impressions on the first season. I watched the first season of TNG not too long ago, I would say about a month or two, so everything's still relatively fresh, so I didn't really need to rewatch the whole season. For this, before I filmed this video, I did rewatch the pilot episode, Encounter at Farpoint, to kind of get into the mindset of it all. So the overall complexion of the season is that it's mostly built up with episodic, self-contained, plot-centric stories that feature the crew of the Enterprise. There are some elements introduced in the first season that continue into the rest of the series. The character of Q, for example, he makes his first appearance in the pilot Encounter at Farpoint, and he reappears in the episode Hiding Q, a really important figure in the TNG show there. And John Delancey does a great job in performing that character. Another example of that ongoing continuity is Data's twin brother Lore is introduced in the show, in the episode Data Lore, and he would go on to be featured in the series as a recurring character in following seasons. Going off on what I mentioned with Denise Crosby leaving the show, her character Tasha Yar is killed in the episode Skin of Evil. Now, this is the first time in Star Trek history where a main member is killed off in an episode. It was a bit surprising, I'm sure, to the audience back in 1987. Some fans think it to be a meaningless death, but I appreciate how realistic it is, how fast life can be taken away, and I thought that was strongly implemented, and it's not like it's brushed off in the episode. At the end, they have a funeral service. Now, in terms of relationships, Riker and Troy's off and on again relationship is touched on. They never really had a romantic relationship in the series as a whole, but it is mentioned that they were once in love in the pilot encounter at Farpoint, so that's one of the things that is established in this first season. And then also Picard and Crusher's backstory, where Picard was friends with Dr. Crusher's husband, Jack Crusher, and he took when Jack Crusher passed away, Picard was the one who took Jack Crusher's body home to Dr. Beverly Crusher, so that was a very poignant moment in those characters' shared backstory. They do have a bit of a slow burn relationship in the first season where they become reacquainted, and then it's inferred that their feelings for one another. As a whole, character development is limited to only a couple of characters because Picard is the main character. He's the captain of the Enterprise. He's developed the most. The audience learns the most about his backstory and his personality. There are a number of episodes in the first season where Picard's past experiences come back into play. Now, I will say a solid portion of the episodes are honestly mediocre in their quality. They're watchable, but really only in passing. The overall quality of these stories do vary, however. The second half of season 1 does have some underrated episodes. The issue lies in that the potential in the idea is there in each and every episode, but the direction and the constraints presented in each episode can really undermine that potential in the story. The first season is a spiritual successor to the original series. There are some ideas that are recycled. This is evident in the episode The Naked Now. It's a spiritual sequel to the original series episode The Naked Time. Some ideas on relationships and characters are also recycled in a way. The production of Phase 2, there is the idea of Commander Decker and Lieutenant Aaliyah having a past relationship. This is evident in Riker and Troy in this interpretation of Star Trek. There's also a stylistic resemblance in terms of the type of planets that the Enterprise visits in this first season. They're very similar to the ones that are visited in the original series, just in terms of the layout of each planet, of the bright backgrounds that is used, like a bright orange or a bright green. Just that's something that I noticed is very similar in style, which I think to be kind of interesting because it's something that isn't repeated after this first season. Also, a number of writers that worked on the original series came back to work on The Next Generation. You had DC Fontana, you had David Gerald, I believe, then you had Rob Justman. I hope I'm getting those names right. All those people were writers in the original series, so in a way that spirit continues here early on, but those voices would go away. On an interesting note, the Ferengi were originally set up as the main antagonist of the show, but that proved to be a mistake. Their first appearance in the episode The Last Outpost is laughable in terms of how they're depicted. They're just very short, funny little creatures that don't pose a plausible threat to the crew of the Enterprise and the Federation as a whole. They just come off as greedy capitalists. It's kind of Roddenberry's critique on capitalism, and I do think the Ferengi could have worked if their characterization was tweaked a bit, where they didn't come off as clownish, if they came off more as domineering and threatening, and their overall depiction in terms of how their alien race was designed, I think it could have been done better. it's for the better that Ferengi weren't made the main antagonists, because the Borg later on in season 2 would prove to be a much more effective villain. Occasionally, but not always, dialogue and interaction can sway to the stilted side at times. There are times where it's very technical in terms of how the dialogue is written. It just doesn't come off as believable that human beings would say some of the lines that they're given. But I think that's a casualty of a revolving door of writers and constant rewrites done by Roddenberry, because he was notorious for taking scripts that didn't rise up to the level that he thought it should be at, and then he would rewrite them entirely. And I do think Roddenberry's writing at that point in time was stilted and unbelievable in delivery. The saving grace of the first season lies in exploring specific facets of humanity, and also in unconventional reality-bending set pieces that are presented through sci-fi concepts made available through Star Trek. Now, what I mean by reality-bending set pieces is that there are scenes in the first season that are made possible because of Star Trek's sci-fi setting. I have a couple of examples in the episode where No Man Has Gone Before. The crew experience visions from their past while traveling to another plane of existence. There's a scene where Picard encounters his grandmother or his mother, I don't remember which. I think that's one of my favorite scenes in that episode. Also, whenever the holodeck is used for an episode, it always provides for a fun time, fun, entertaining romp. It's a trademark for Star Trek for characters to discuss and explore philosophical concepts that touch on humanity. The Next Generation continues what the original series set out to do in terms of that. Some examples from episodes: the notion of evil and pent-up anger is explored in Skin of Evil. The idea of addiction is explored in Symbiosis. The idea of having a love that is completely fantastical in nature, something that one can only dream of, is explored in the episode 110-1101. The scope of human potential is discussed and touched on in the underrated episode Hide and Q. So whenever there's a scene where characters are discussing ideas relating to a specific facet of humanity, something that has been known to how humans operate and what they have discovered internally, is when this first season really excels, in my opinion. And usually Patrick Stewart delivers a really good exchange with the antagonist of that episode, and it makes for a really intriguing sequence that you come away with after the episode is over. Then you have your fun sci-fi episodes in where No One Has Gone Before, where the Enterprise travels faster than they thought possible to outside the galaxy. Then you have The Big Goodbye, where Picard, Crusher, and Data go into the noir world of the 20th century via the holodeck. I always love holodeck-centric stories. Then you have We'll Always Have Paris, which touches on Picard's youth. One of my favorite scenes in We'll Always Have Paris is when Picard is brewing over his past actions. He uses the holodeck to reminisce, which is a great way to show him dwelling on the past visually. It's one of my favorite scenes. It's very simple. He just sits down at this cafe, thinks about his past life. Then you have the fan favorite episode Conspiracy, which I do agree with is the best episode of this first season. You have the Enterprise investigating this infiltration of Starfleet by these parasitic aliens, and it's a fun time to see Picard and Riker uncover this very suspicious infiltration, which was hinted at before in the episode Coming of Age, which was nice to see that there was a little bit of a build-up to that. Now, what's disappointing is that the season finale, the Neutral Zone, had the potential to be a really good episode, really good wrap-up to the series, because it foreshadowed an upcoming threat, but this was kind of sidetracked by a subplot that meanders for way too long in the episode. It takes up too much of the screen time, and it really derails the whole episode entirely, which was really disappointing because you saw the Romulans come back after a century of absence, and that could have been much more effective than what was done on screen. And then here's some of the last impressions, which maybe aren't as important. I do like the design of the Enterprise D. I didn't at first, but it grew on me over time. Just a really beautiful ship design that is very much different than to what was seen in the original series. The uniforms aren't my favorite. They did get redesigned in season 3 for the better. Ron Jones' music is really great whenever he is the composer of an episode, and I've listened to his episodic music on Spotify on a number of trips that I've taken to school and to work. And of course the visual effects in this first season of TNG are to a high standard for the late 1980s. Can't really fault the show and that first season for the effects there. They're fine. While a mixed bag in overall quality, the first season does provide a decent amount of good Star Trek episodes that I hopefully touched on. It is TNG at its lowest point in terms of the characters and the presentation of alien cultures and planets. I would argue, however, that season 1 may be close to season 7 in overall quality. Ultimately, to answer the question that I put forth in this video, I don't think season 1 should be dismissed by Star Trek fans. There's enough here to latch onto in terms of exciting, fun sci-fi concepts, even though it may be a bit on the dry side at times. There's a good deal that's established here as well, so it's important to look up and pay attention to that when it is presented. Okay, so that's it for today's video. Alright, that's it for today's video. Hopefully some of you out there liked it and are considering to give this first season of TNG a try. If not, just watch Conspiracy. It's crazy fun. It's dark for Star Trek, but you gotta check it out just out of curiosity. So click that subscribe button because there's going to be more videos coming soon. And have a good rest of your day.